Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. New Zealand media is reporting that the Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora fight, which is mooted for October the 26th in London, could be called off if Derek Chisora does not agree to a drug testing protocol. So the article here, which I'll get to, I'll go through some of the key points and then on to some thoughts, because in light of some of the recent events in the heavyweight division, drug testing and seen to be clean in boxing is really a big thing right now. People put a premium on clean fighters. So we'll get to the New Zealand Herald story first. So it says boxing, Joseph Parker threatens to call off Derek Chisora fight. And the story here, which is by Dylan Cleaver, says the mouth-watering heavyweight clash between Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora is under threat as the New Zealanders management team has not been able to get a commitment around drugs testing. The fight is slated to take place on October. Okay, we've been through that. However, Parker's manager David Higgins today dropped a bombshell saying that the fight was off unless they could get Chisora to commit to WADA-sanctioned blood and urine testing anywhere in the world up to and immediately following the fight. So it goes on to quote David Higgins here, "We received a formal offer to fight Derek Chisora on October 26. We have accepted on the condition that two clauses are inserted into the contract. One is that Joseph's fight will be no earlier than the penultimate fight on the card, and the other is drug testing protocols." So the story goes on to say here, apart from it being likely on the Josh Taylor and Regis Prograis undercard, which would be the chief support or co-main event, Parker's camp said promoters had promised a response to his demands for the drug testing clause, but they had failed to materialise. Higgins said as of this morning he'd received no assurances from the matchroom promoters that the clause would be inserted in the contract. And Higgins is quoted again here, "Under the circumstances of those conditions not being met, unfortunately we will have to pull out of the fight." And then the story goes on to say that it actually says that this would be one of the biggest heavyweight fights of the year, which I thought was maybe slightly sort of stretching things. But then when I considered, what sort of dearth of heavyweight action we've had so far this year, actually it would be one of the bigger fights, but certainly not in the sort of top 2 or 3, but it is a decent fight for the heavyweight division. So what do I make of all this? Well, when I first read this, Joseph Parker threatens to call off Derek Chisora fight, I just sort of wondered, well, how much of this is a beat-up? Is the Herald sort of seizing on some comments and effectively maybe blowing them out of proportion? Because you would have noted here that there is no sort of quote from Higgins said that the other side, David Hay and Derek Chisora's camp, had effectively said no, there was nothing to suggest that they wouldn't agree to it, although it said they hadn't responded to him wanting that clause in the contract for drug testing. So how much of this is just sort of picking up on a statement which can be read a certain way, and especially if there's no answer to that thing that they want in the contract? And then I sort of thought, well, David Higgins using the media, it wouldn't surprise me if he's publicly trying to put pressure on David Hay and Derek Chisora through the media to get this into the contract. Because when I was sort of thinking about it, for some certain level of fights, there's often not extensive drug testing in place. And does this Chisora and Parker one sort of meet that threshold? And I sort of weigh it up and go, well, you always expect some level of drug testing to be in place, but this sounds like it is more than just the sort of run-of-the-mill, that this is going to be some anytime, anywhere, a bit more extensive than otherwise would have been in place. So, and it actually said earlier in the article that it was WADA-sanctioned blood and urine testing anywhere in the world. I just wonder if that's actually VADA, not WADA, but that's beside the point. What they're asking for is specific and comprehensive testing for this fight. And in the circumstances in the heavyweight division right now, I don't think that's really that unreasonable to ask for, especially in light of some allegations swirling around Dillian Whyte and such, and before that you had Jarrell Miller. So I don't think it's unfair for Joseph Parker and David Higgins for us for that. But as we know, these things do cost, and it could cost somewhere $40,000 to $50,000, for a full drug testing protocol. At least for VADA, that's I think for Dillian Whyte's, for him and Oscar Rivas, it was something like $40,000. So it's not cheap, and when you consider this is going to be a co-main event, it's not like the payday is going to be the biggest payday in the world. I'm sure they're not going to go hungry from whatever they're going to get paid, but you often see the more extensive and comprehensive drug testing in place where, the paydays are well in excess of $1 million or something like that. And we know Anthony Joshua, for his most recent fights, has had all sorts of drug testing in place to make sure that the fighters he's been facing have been clean. And obviously, it was some of that drug testing that caught Jarrell Miller out in the lead up to what would have been a June 1st fight against Joshua. So this will be a costly and expensive addition to the contract, because obviously it's got to come from somewhere. And where would it come from? It would come from the fighters, out of the purse that they would have otherwise got. So maybe in that light, it could be a bit of a sting in the tail and sort of take away some of the attraction to fight Joseph Parker. Not because Derek Chisora wouldn't want to do the drug testing, but just it would actually be rather expensive and take a bite out of what he would be taking home. Because remember, there's all sorts of people, from a payday that are taking a cut. You've got a full training camp. That won't be cheap. Dave Coldwell's a trainer. He won't be cheap. David Haye, he's taking his cut. And there'll be all sorts of other things coming out as well, like sanctioning fees, because there will be, some sort of belt on the line here, you'd imagine, because otherwise this is just a pretty decent fight with nothing on the line. So there's going to be all sorts of money coming out of, their pockets to pay for all sorts of things. But I do think if this is something that Joseph Parker and his team, David Higgins, want to push for, it's a good thing. And in light of what's been going on, boxing needs to be seen to be clean. And if Derek Chisora and David Haye, even if it does come down to money that they don't want to do it, I think fans would sort of look at them suspiciously if they didn't sign up to this. So I think the pressure here from Higgins using the media to sort of say, hey, if we don't get this, the fight is off, I think that could actually well work. Maybe they would have wanted to do this anyway, that they would have ultimately signed up to it. I guess it depends what sort of testing protocol is going to be in place, how comprehensive is it, and how much does it cost? Because, if it's 1 or 2 tests, it will be a lot cheaper than if it's, half a dozen tests. But even with the Dillian Whyte and Oscar Rivas tests, I think as we heard it was for $40,000 for VADA. It actually doesn't go nearly as far as you think. But I do think, random testing, anywhere, anytime, any place, it is a good thing overall. So I hope this does get resolved quickly, because I wouldn't want to see the kibosh get put over this fight, because for Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora, to some extent, they need each other right now in terms of where they're going in the heavyweight division. Chisora wants to prove that he's still got something left, beating a top name in Joseph Parker, move on to a bigger and better fight, and maybe position himself for a title at some point. That would seem a little bit remote, but obviously there's a pathway that he can go down. And for Joseph Parker, he needs to come back after a couple of lower level opponents after losses to Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte. Then he faced Alexander Flores and Alex Leopai. He needs a better name on his record to sort of springboard him into better competition, but to sort of make a statement to fans that he's ready back, that he's ready to contend again. So I hope this gets resolved sooner rather than later. There's a part of me that thinks that maybe it's a little bit of a beat up, that maybe Higgins is playing the media here to really get his point across, to ram this home, to get the deal done, get his clauses over the line. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.